Given what we're seeing with the Omicron variant, what do you think the impact is going to be on China, and how sustainable is China's zero COVID policy given all this news?
My analysis of where the Chinese are up to in terms of their national COVID policy is to leave their borders effectively closed for the duration of 2022. At least through the end of the 20th Party Congress in October and November at the end of next year. What's the reason for that? Is that they don't want any unmanageable or unanticipated risks that they have to deal with, which would in any way potentially destabilize politics if there was a significant outbreak. This new variant has reinforced the Chinese leadership's determination to go it alone. If you look carefully at their internal discourse on this through the official media, it basically says, look at this new variant. It proves the wisdom of the Chinese leadership's decision to go to a zero tolerance policy in terms of eliminating the virus within China. So therefore, that entrenches their predisposition to keep the borders closed. I don't see any change in that really being possible. Some very minor exceptions through until the end of 2022.
If that means that we've got challenges on the supply chain, they're prepared to deal with that. The population will be prepared to deal with that. This is Xi Jinping saying this is the right strategy, and we're going to go to it hell or high water.
Yeah, that's his determination. I think if you look at Chinese domestic politics closely, they had the internal shock of their life in that period between January and March of 2020 when the thing broke out, before they brought it under control. And those of us who look at the entrails of Chinese domestic politics, there was enough, shall we say, murmuring at the edges from people unhappy with Xi Jinping's leadership on how did the virus break out, how did it spread so quickly, and the ineffectiveness of the early suppression efforts. That this has established a deep pathology in Xi Jinping's mind about not entertaining parallel risks with any variant of the virus in 2022. So I think I cannot see an easy exit strategy for them politically on this, whatever the public health officials may be saying on it. Of course, the economic implications, I think, continue to be profound in terms of supply chain disruption.
As you, of course, have watched as the Chinese have said that they would like to formally join the CPTPP, an organization that Obama wasn't able to actually get approval on. And of course, Trump pulled out, and the U.S. doesn't really have a comprehensive multilateral trade policy right now. What does it say to you that the Chinese government decided that they actually want in? And how do you think the Asian countries are likely to respond to that request?
If you're the government of Japan, you'd just be pulling your hair out, literally, and the 10-year-long evolution of this process. A few countries, Japan, and in fact, back to my own period as Prime Minister of Australia, we were urging the United States to do something like the TPP. This is the Obama administration. Secondly, when you look in that period of the pivot and the Obama administration to Asia, the national security dimensions of that were fine, but the real hard policy element of the pivot was not a national security element, it was this trade component, a massive trading entity which would exclude a non-free economy, namely China. And I know from the literature at the time how deeply paranoid the Chinese were about the emergence of this TPP, linking the Americans, the Japanese, Australians, and a bunch of other economies, and that it growing and becoming a high-quality trade agreement with all these participating states. For me, the greatest tragedy of the last decade has been the failure of American political will to ratify this agreement. Anyway, what are the prospects now? You've got to take your hat off to the Chinese in terms of their diplomatic, tactical dexterity in pivoting to this and communicating to the TPP countries that they would be prepared to sign without any significant amendment to the agreement. Now, that is basically pulling the rug from under the normal levels of opposition, which that China would want to downgrade the agreement in order to make it, more compatible with China's own mercantilist practices. So therefore, it exposes TPP states to, frankly, ruling out China on geopolitical grounds. And therefore, that makes it really difficult for Tokyo, for Canberra, both of whom have signed up to the existing TPP amongst the 11 states. So how's it going to land? I can't speak for the government in Japan, and I'm not close enough to internal thinking in Tokyo as to which way they'll go. I think it would take a very brave Australian government to provide support for China's accession, given the disastrous state of the Australia-China relationship, both political and economic at present.
And so, on the trade side, clearly the Chinese are outperforming the United States in Asia right now. They've got RCEP as well, which has moved along. On the new architecture of Asia, you'd argue that a lot of what's being put together right now is not so favorable to Beijing. You've seen the AUKUS agreement, which has come together, which the Chinese took even more exception to than the French did, frankly. You see the Build Back Better World announced by the Americans, support from Australia, Japan, many other countries. And most importantly, of course, is the integration of the Quad, which includes most notably India. And I wonder how you think these new pieces of international architecture, aligned with Washington in the Pacific, are making a difference.
That's the key question. Are they making a difference? What I can say is that not only have they been noted in Beijing, but they've given rise to real geopolitical concern in Beijing. Take the Quad as the example, because it most directly affects our friends in Japan. The Chinese, if you look at the evolution of their responses to the Quad in the last year and a half, have gone through 2 or 3 phases. One, dismissal. Their deep internal assessment was that the internal divisions between Delhi, Tokyo, Canberra and Washington would prevent this from unfolding, particularly from the Indians. Secondly, of course, once it happened, and as a direct consequence of the Sino-Indian border clashes of mid-2020.
Which is largely China's fault, yeah.
Absolutely. The Chinese, international relations, like domestic politics, is the science of action and reaction. And so you have a Chinese action on the Sino-Indian border, and I've discussed this with the Indian Foreign Minister recently, the fundamental impact that had on the Indian political elites about the future of the Quad. And now it is a done deal in terms of whatever historical Indian reservations were. And so Chinese responses to India's accession and the fact we've now had 2 Quad summits, one physical and one virtual, frankly has gone from dismissal to now denigration to the rest of the region, because they fear that this may acquire greater, as it were, levels of diplomatic acceptance and reception on the part of other non-Quad states in Asia. Here's what I think the bottom line is and why the Chinese are concerned. In the raw geopolitics of it, whatever our friends in Southeast Asia and in South Korea may say about the Quad and any reservations they've got about heightened geopolitical tensions in Asia, whatever they may say publicly, privately, most of them are quite relieved. For this reason, the existence of this geopolitical pushback against Beijing creates more freedom for diplomatic maneuver on the part of the Southeast Asian states in particular. And therefore, it actually acquires them more freedom of movement and more, shall I say, robustness in their own separate dealings with Beijing, because, as it were, the Quad is, I won't say got their back, but it's behind them. That's why Beijing's concerned.